It is the Doomsday Podcast, and you may be like, wait, a game hadn't been played. But, Ed, at Rogue Media Network, and with the two of us, it's just, we never stop, okay? We never stop preparing. And so we wanted to do a special Cowboys preview. Cowboys getting ready to play Cleveland, in Cleveland Sunday afternoon. I'm amazed at, with the Cowboys, of course, there's always a lot of stuff brewing. I'm amazed at how people are just kind of like real blah toward the Browns, even though they made the playoffs last year without their starting quarterback. You would think there would be some sort of buildup from the Browns' perspective. They are favored slightly in some of the places I've looked. But, Ed, before we really get into the nitty gritty of this preview, bring us up to date. We understand you have, after exiting briefly TV, you've re-entered TV this time with the ABC affiliate WFAA in Dallas. So we're kind of excited about that. Tell us about what we can expect from Ed Werder, and will this impact your doomsday efforts at all? People are wanting to know, including your cohort, me. And did you ever bring up, hey, you could have both of us, or did that never enter the negotiations?
This wasn't a Troy Aikman, Joe Buck like negotiation where I was offering us on the open market as a twosome and nothing else. So no, I was not able to secure a spot for you. I feel fortunate I was able to get myself one. Given the demographic situation that I find myself in after 26 years at ESPN. My contract did expire, as I think most people know. I am glad that among my portfolio elements this year will be the Doomsday Podcast, a very high priority for both of us. But yeah, it was announced yesterday. I went and shot some promos. You may have seen some of those. Very excited about joining Joe Trahan's award-winning sports staff. He was very supportive of this idea from the very beginning. Carolyn Mungo is the station manager. Sean Hamilton is the sports director. Pete Friedman runs the online element. And I'll be working 3 days a week. I'll do some television as part of my Cowboys coverage. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I will also be providing an online element, a written element, something I haven't done in a very long time. So I'm excited about joining this team. It nearly happened in 2017 when I was laid off by ESPN, but they brought me back. My contract kind of complicated the negotiations, and I wasn't able to break free and join WFAA at the time. But Carolyn was very persistent and very patient and very creative in coming up with this role for me. So I'll be at all the home games for sure. At the moment, I'm not scheduled to travel, and here's why, Matt. You know what a morning person I am.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the new things that I'm going to bring to WFAA is the day after, not really the day after, the early morning after every Cowboys game, home and on the road, I'll be in the studio in Dallas with the Daybreak crew and Emmy winner Mark Eistook, and I will do segments on the Cowboys and what happened the day before, good and bad, win or lose. And I believe those will air live sometime in the 6 a.m. hour. From a studio downtown, which is not where I live, by the way.
This is a bad idea on your part. I'm glad you could. I really, our audience was dying to hear about basically the entire Channel 8 staff. Did you want to mention Mike and Jonah and some of the others? My gosh.
Michelle, the new employee. She's the new reporter that they just brought on.
Iztook.
Looking forward to working with her.
Can't wait to meet him, Mr. Iztook. But the Doomsday I'm just thinking about those nights where we finish up at about 2 and you're going to be down there by 6. I really would. I would call Carolyn Mungo and just call this thing off.
I think I should have asked him if they wanted you for that role.
The morning, I'll send Mosley for the morning. Yeah. There's certainly no way. There's no amount. But congratulations on that. We'll look forward to seeing you on Channel 8. And what's funny is now 2 of the 3 members of the Doomsday family will have roles with WFAA because Glenn Stretch Smith, our scout and coach, former Cowboys scout and coach, also has a role at WFAA. So, Carolyn, if you're watching, I mean, there's only one of us left. I don't know what you have left. Maybe,
What's the
yeah.
Meatloaf song? 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
That's right. Maybe you have like a 3 in the afternoon show. I don't know what you'll do, but anyway, keep me in mind. All right, without further ado, let's get to the Doomsday preview show. Mike, please play the music. All right, and there it is, Ed Werder, Matt Mosley, and it is time for the season. Cowboys do not have a blemish on their record yet. Here come the Browns. Cowboys will head to Cleveland and play this. And Ed, what used to be a rivalry. I was reading one of our buddies, Tim, and dating himself as always, talking about the great rivalry of the 1960s with the Browns, and the old Cowboys couldn't break through, and then finally in like 60, I don't know, 67 or 68, they started breaking through and beating the Browns. But the Browns, after the merger, were sent in the opposite direction, and so it has not quite been the battle that it used to be. And so the Cowboys show up in Cleveland, and two very interesting quarterbacks. Let's talk first about the Cowboys quarterback, Dak Prescott. And as sure as we tape this on Wednesday, he will not have a contract. By Friday, somehow they'll get it together and he'll have a contract. But we think they will let him enter the season without a contract. And obviously, he's still in the final year of his contract without a new contract. And Ed, interesting, since we last talked back and forth between Dak and Jerry, Jerry just kind of walking all over the place. In fact, Ed, I saw somebody make the point that maybe this was in the Ringer story I was reading this morning. They said Jerry's a month older than Joe Biden. Not sure what their point was, but they did make that argument, sort of as the debates come up. I think it was in that context. But Jerry was kind of wandering around, talking about the contract. He's been somewhat hopeful, but Dak basically says, I don't pay any attention to anything Jerry says. And I thought it was a pretty honest moment from Dak.
Well, I think the most important takeaway from the last two times Jerry and Dak have spoken publicly is that Jerry has both times suggested that there's nothing wrong, that he has Dak under contract, and there's nothing wrong with the concept of forcing a player or a coach to honor the final year of a contract that they signed and agreed to after careful negotiations. And Dak, in his most recent comments, said something to the effect of he doesn't have to have a new contract before week 1 at Cleveland, but whether he does or he doesn't, will say something. It will make a statement, at least to him, about the front office and whether, I assume he means whether they believe in him or not as a starting quarterback. And there's all kinds of reasons for Dak Prescott to fairly wonder whether they are fully committed to him beyond this season if he doesn't have a contract for it. And I would just say the one good thing about this, if Mike McCarthy goes into the final year of his contract, the entire coaching staff on the final year of their contracts, Dak Prescott and 20 other players in the final year of their contracts, including Zach Martin, DeMarcus Lawrence, it has the potential. Jerry thinks it motivates people, first of all, to be in that situation. It also was something Jimmy Johnson, the master motivator, took advantage of when he had his own issues with Jerry. He kind of turned the franchise into us against the front office. It's the coaching staff and the players against the front office, and that was effective in the 90s when they won Super Bowls. But really, it's hard for me to imagine Jerry Jones, despite his comfort level with ambiguity, as he always says, is really willing to take on this amount of risk. I mean, it's unusual for any NFL quarterback, a franchise quarterback like Dak Prescott, to reach the contract year. This is the third time in the last 6 years, Prescott's been in this situation. But to me, not signing him before week one would really prove to potentially be one of the most monumental organizational failures in franchise history, because even though he played the final year of his contract twice before when franchise tagged, at that time they had a method to control his ability to get to the free market. And this time they don't have that. This time, if he plays out his contract and his final year, unlike the previous two times, he can become an unrestricted free agent in which the Cowboys will have no control over his future. And that's potentially damaging, I think, not only for this season, but for who knows how many seasons beyond. If you remember the quarterback lapse between Troy Aikman's retirement and Tony Romo's emergence, some of the guys who played and the futility the franchise endured during that time, and they don't have any quarterback signed beyond this year. All three of the quarterbacks, Dak, Cooper Rush, and Trey Lance, who, by the way, is a $5 million third-string quarterback, none of those guys are signed beyond this year. So if you don't have Dak, what's the plan?
Yeah, there is no backup plan. And as you know, and what happens is when you do this so often, the quarterback just continues to have huge leverage over the organization. And then, as you said, Micah's coming up, DeMarcus, whatever way, you just start naming players. They're coming up. Ed, I was reminded, as you just mentioned, Romo, that that Romo in 2007 was on a roll, and they were having a great season, and that was his first year to start the season, right? He had taken over for Bledsoe in 2006, and he's on a roll, and he and his agent are starting to get just a bit perturbed that nothing is done. And as I recall, you and I broke that story maybe after the Chicago game that season or whatever, and Romo did get his first big long-term deal, and that was about midway through that season, about 7 games into it, Ed, as I recall. And that would have been a double ESPN.com byline, Mosley and Werder, and that was at a time when Tony still talked to us all the time.
So you're saying it's not there is a precedent for the Cowboys to sign their starting quarterback after week one and during the season, and Dak and Jerry, neither of them has ruled out that possibility. Dak has merely said he's not going to be directly involved as he has been to this point once the season starts, and all of his focus is on this season. And that's sort of what Jerry has said. Like, he wants everybody now at this point to focus on the field and for everything to be invested in playing and winning the games, and then see what evolves, financially beyond that as that occurs. But I just think it's a huge mistake if they don't sign Dak Prescott. I think he's earned it. I get that Jerry can fairly question, I think, hey, you know what? I paid you $40 million a year, and you haven't succeeded in the postseason when you've had the opportunity. 2 home losses in the first playoff game of the year, games that they never led against San Francisco and last year against Green Bay. And he doesn't want to reward Mike McCarthy. He doesn't want to reward Dak Prescott for on-field failure. I totally get that. But he just doesn't have a safeguard. He doesn't have a way to protect himself if he lets Dak go and play it out, and Dak proves him wrong, or Jerry will say proved him right, and goes and accomplishes something in the postseason that hasn't been done here in many decades, and then walks and has the opportunity to walk to the highest bidder if that's what he wants to do. I just think there's way too much risk for the Cowboys.
Well, yeah, and you made the point earlier, for 6 or 7, 8 seasons, they wandered around in the quarterback wilderness between Aikman. Romo arrives in 2003. They luck out on him. He doesn't see the field till 2006, and it's just a hodgepodge of Vinny and Drew and Quincy, and it's a mess. So I do think there are some fans who probably are ready for what's next at quarterback. But boy, it's one of those. Be careful what you wish for, because they have
Can we? I think we should point out, as you sort of just began, how incredibly fortunate the Cowboys have been with their last 2 starting quarterbacks, neither of whom has delivered in the postseason. Neither's played their best in the postseason. They both have won, 2 games in the postseason in their careers. Romo 2-4, Dak 2-5. But Romo was an undrafted player. I mean, one of the greatest undrafted quarterbacks in history. And Dak, at the very moment Romo's career came to an end in the preseason in Seattle with the back injury, there's Dak Prescott, a 4th-round pick, not expected to suit up, who goes out and wins 13 games that year. So they've been incredibly fortunate. They haven't had a master plan of succession like the 49ers have had or the Packers more recently have had. They've just been incredibly fortunate. And so now to throw that all away and risk that. And it's not like Trey Lance was great in the preseason and maybe he's, worthy of an opportunity. He's earned he threw 5 picks in the last preseason games.
Yeah. No, and you and I had a good visit with him, and we thought we'd pointed him in the right direction, and things got away from him in that last one. So the Cowboys head into Cleveland. Ed, one of the things will be what will the chemistry with CeeDee Lamb be early? Will we look back and go, oh man, much ado about nothing? Or will we, after the first game, will it be some not on the same page? I could see it going either way. I really could. I don't know if I can't say with all certainty that CeeDee Lamb's going to step up there and have a huge game. I mean, that's one of Cleveland's best players, Denzel Ward at cornerback. They have, and obviously they've got a great pass rusher in Garrett. I mean, it's going to be quite a challenge for the Cowboys. And Ed, I know you've been looking at this Cleveland team as they come in here. On the flip side of what the Cowboys have with Dak, I mean, the Browns gave Deshaun Watson this unprecedented contract despite all the legal issues and the wrangling, and they gave up a huge, everything they gave up, the draft picks. I mean, the Texans now have kind of used that as their launching pad. And that was a team, by the way, that was out, thought they had a great quarterback, and then he has all this off-the-field craziness that happens. And here is Cleveland with what should be, what we thought was a star quarterback in the prime of his career. And Ed, I don't think anybody knows what to make of him. Nobody puts him like in the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL, unless you're just talking about talent-wise. So it's hard to know what to make of Cleveland because last year, they get into the playoffs with Joe Flacco, and actually, they made a nice post, down the stretch run. I don't know if anybody feels that great about Deshaun Watson heading into this season.
Well, I think Dak, because of the CeeDee Lamb, missing all the training camp. If you look at it historically, Dak has not been especially good, generally speaking. He was great in Tampa a couple of years ago. Early in the season, it tends to take him 3 or 4 games, and he's among 13 starting quarterbacks who have not played at all in the preseason. And Deshaun Watson's one of those guys too. And as you were speaking, it occurred to me that Cleveland's a perfect example for Jerry to look at and go, how hard it is to find a starting quarterback. And even when there seems to be one, and you invest so heavily, look what it cost Cleveland to get Deshaun Watson under the worst possible circumstances for the player. And Dak's not going to have any of that. He doesn't have any of that baggage. And I think it'll be 302 days since Deshaun Watson last started a game. He's only played 12 games the last 2 years combined in Cleveland. So I wouldn't expect Cleveland to be great throwing the football either, although they have a lot of weapons. They acquired Jerry Jeudy. They re-signed Amari Cooper to an extension. They don't have Nick Chubb. But don't forget, Nick Chubb went out. The last time these two teams played in 2020, COVID-era football at Jerry World, the Browns smashed the Cowboys, had the most rushing yards against the Cowboys in franchise history, and led 41-14. So you talk about a test for your, run defense right from the start, and that's the reason you hired Mike Zimmer. And now you have linebackers on the roster who are legitimate linebackers. I mean, you signed 3 players, veteran defensive linemen right after training camp. I mean, those guys are going to get an immediate big test. And the Cowboys, I thought it was interesting, this week that McCarthy made the point about, hey, we're going to take a different approach to these road games. They have played badly on the road. They're 36-15. Only Kansas City's won more games in the regular season the last 3 years. But those last two teams are 21-4 at home, and I'm sorry, they're 16-1 at home the last two years, 8-9 on the road. And this combines everything. This is a great defense, a great road defense, a hostile environment, a grass surface, none of which have accommodated the Cowboys or caused them to deliver their best performances. And early, in the season, I expect this to be a potentially really ugly game. And then you mentioned the Cowboys, as much talent as they have, it looks like they're gonna start 4 rookies, including 2 on the offensive line. Tyler Guyton at left tackle and Cooper Beebe at center. Myles Garrett up against a rookie in his first NFL start. I mean, I talked to Terrence Steele, the right tackle, the last time the Cowboys played the Browns, and I think Myles Garrett had 2 sacks, 1 a strip sack against Terrence Steele. And the one thing he said, Matt, was the one thing that Guyton has that he didn't in his week of preparation is a lot of practice snaps against Micah Parsons, who was not yet in the NFL in 2020 as Terrence Steele got ready to play against Myles Garrett. So maybe that makes something of a difference. But I think this is going to be a very, very difficult game for the Cowboys on Sunday.
I'm glad you brought up Micah, and I want to talk about that for a second. But because, of course, everything seems we have to talk through the contract, but let's stay on the field with him. I did want to say real quick, though, because I had I had heard something about this, and so I wanted to make sure I had the quote right. Cal McNair's wife, did you hear about this?
I don't think so.
The Houston Texans owner's wife was on some kind of podcast, and she was talking. Somehow it came up about the trade they made, sending Deshaun Watson to the Browns. And so she's quoted recently saying on a podcast, "Thank a Brown. Have you thanked a Brown lately? I thank them for all of our players." That's Hannah McNair. Way to go, Hannah.
Because she's saying of all the picks that they acquired for the Deshaun Watson trade, they turned them into a team that went from 3-13-1 and goes and wins a division with a first-year head coach in DeMeco Ryans and
great quarterback
and a rookie quarterback in C.J. Stroud, which is, I mean, it set the standard that guys like Dan Quinn and Jaden Daniels will be hoping for in Washington this year.
Have you thanked a Brown lately? I like Hannah. We may have Hannah on Doomsday.
I was thinking, I wish she had said that on this podcast.
Do the Cowboys have the Texans on the schedule somewhere?
Yes.
Okay.
They play a primetime game here at Jerry World about midway through the season.
Hannah McNair. She will be our guest that week for our preview if we decide to do any more of these. Now, Ed, you brought up Micah Parsons. This is going to be interesting because this is Mike Zimmer's first game back. Mike Zimmer taking over as defensive coordinator. There's been some thought that he's going to move Micah around even more, have him off the line, back at linebacker. He's going to be kind of all around. This will be interesting because Parsons, who has been in each of his first 3 seasons, top 3 in the Defensive Player of the Year voting. Some people think he may be ready to break through. Ed, this has been an interesting build-up to the season with Micah and Zim, our friend, because it's like early on it was kind of like they didn't know they were kind of feeling each other out. Mike, we talked to Mike, like, well, have you talked to Micah yet? He's like, no, we hadn't really had a chance to talk. And you and I were like, well, that's kind of interesting. And then Micah said something along the lines of he hadn't really said anything to me. And so we wondered where that relationship was going. Now it seems to have evolved a little bit. There seems to be a mutual respect. But, Ed, this is for the Cowboys to get where they want to go. Micah Parsons has to be, if not the best defensive player in the league, one of the top couple. And so far in his career, he's been that guy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think there are many games that the Cowboys go into where Micah Parsons isn't potentially the most feared pass rusher on the field for either team. But this is one of those games. And I think it'll be part of his personal agenda to try to demonstrate he's better than Myles Garrett, the reigning NFL Defensive Player of the Year, even though Micah had more sacks than he did. And he'll get that chance again when they go up against the Steelers in Pittsburgh against T.J. Watt. But yeah, I mean, Micah is unique to me among. I'm not sure I've seen a young player more motivated to achieve greatness, not just stardom, but true greatness than Micah Parsons. And he does it his own way. I mean, he trains on his own during the off season. He does a lot of boxing, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu. He talked about yoga this year. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he's required to do more than rush the passer on any kind of a consistent basis, how he embraces that role and how he performs in that role, because we really haven't seen that. He's pretty much evolved since his rookie year into an edge rusher. And that's where he's made his mark. And those are the guys who get paid. And and that's what he'll be thinking about. But I think he's bought into Zimmer from what I can tell. And Mike's a very creative guy with his blitzes and his pass rushes. I think he'll get as much out of Micah Parsons as Dan Quinn did, even if he does it in a different way.
All right, and Ed, one thing we'll also be watching on the Cowboys defense is while they have extremely talented defensive ends, losing Sam Williams and Nealon having to step in there, and he's going to get more time. The middle of the Cowboys defense, Mozzie Smith, Osa Odigizua, expected to get the start. Ed, I would say that's where Cleveland has a big advantage. I'm told that, boy, you follow all these teams, but between Wyatt Teller, Ethan Pocic, and Joel Bitonio, extremely strong in the interior of their offensive line. And Ed, the Cowboys had to go get Linval Joseph. They had to bring another veteran in.
Jordan Phillips.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the kid from Oklahoma, but yeah, they had to fortify the D line, and quite honestly,
Carl Lawson.
It's just not. I would just say that defensive line is not as deep or not as talented, especially at tackle, as has been in the past. And you're waiting to see, while Mozzie has shown signs this preseason of turning the corner, you're waiting to see what you have there. So I going into this game, I would have to say, just looking on paper, advantage Cleveland with the interior of their offensive line against these defensive tackles.
Well, I think the Cowboys, obviously, they sort of moved free agency, right? They were criticized in the spring for being the last team to sign a player, for really not being involved at any kind of significant level at all, especially when you're talking about making a scheme change on defense from Dan Quinn's approach to Mike Zimmer's. But I mean, that's kind of what they did as they got down to their final weeks of roster building at the end of training camp. They were very active in free agency, especially on the defensive line, going out and getting players with size, proven veterans that they can depend upon. And I think all of that will come to bear. This is going to be, you talk about, like Mike, McCarthy talked about the emphasis this offseason on physical run game, physical defense, being physically tough and mentally tough. Well, this schedule early on is really going to challenge them, and it starts on Sunday with Cleveland, and then 2 weeks later, you're playing the Baltimore Ravens. You've got the Pittsburgh Steelers. You've got the Lions. You've got the San Francisco 49ers. All of those are some of the most physically tough teams in football, play a very punishing style that takes a lot out of an opponent, and I think they're better for going out and getting these veteran players because they're not going to wear out until late in the year. They should be fresh now and ready to go, and they know what it takes to get ready at this point. If they're not in training camp, they did it by choice, and they feel comfortable that they can come in and play right away.
All right, and it'll be interesting to see the Cowboys, certainly with CD back in there. What's this Cowboys run game? I mean, not one of the most dynamic groups the Cowboys have ever rolled out. In fact, Ed, I would say, they had that one season where they had to trade for Amari because they were so bad at wide receiver. It's hard to recall a time where they were this thin, just from a talent perspective, at running back going into a season. I mean, because even in the past, we would think, oh, Pollard's going to have a breakout year. He was even last year. Oh, it's Pollard's turn now. He's going to be good. This is a group that I not even the biggest Cowboys fan could be that excited about.
Yeah, I think, talking to people at training camp and in the time I've spent at the Star since, they made a conscious decision this offseason not to pay the running back position. They paid Zeke at the top of the running back scale for a number of years. Last year they paid Tony Pollard on a franchise tag almost $12 million. And now what they're doing, though, at the other extreme, seems almost nonsensical to me, in that you're starting two rookies on the offensive line at key positions for the first time since 2011. And that was when Tyron Smith and Bill Nagy started as rookies on the offensive line in week one. So you're banking on an offensive line that features two rookies, and you're putting them with running backs who are either nondescript and Rico Dowdle or veterans who are clearly descending players. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott and Dalvin Cook both had poor statistical years last year. Now, they were with bad teams. There aren't worse offensive teams than the Patriots and the Jets last year. But Ezekiel Elliott, who won 2 rushing titles here, he's had 7 consecutive years where he's averaged fewer rushing yards per game each season. That's never happened. He's the first player in NFL history to experience that. 7 consecutive years of declining numbers in terms of yards per game. And Dalvin Cook averaged 3.2 yards per game last year. So it seems to me they brought Dalvin Cook in on the recommendation of Mike Zimmer, sort of to protect them in case Zeke is really done. I don't think they brought him in to pair him with Zeke. I think they brought him in to protect them as sort of an insurance policy in case when they finally see Zeke, because they haven't yet, didn't play him in the preseason, he's too valuable. 2 years ago, he doesn't have value and they let him go. They seemingly end his Dallas career. Now they bring him back, and he's so valuable that they don't play him in the preseason. So they have no idea really what he's capable of. I do think he's going to be he's a benefit in the locker room from a leadership point of view. He's going to be good, I think, help them a really bad team in red zone, rushing, goal line, short yardage. But I don't know where their rushing yards are going to come from. And you know what? Mike McCarthy's pretty much as he's talked throughout his career about wanting to run the football more, he really never has. He's always played the game through the quarterback, and that's what he's going to do again this year with Dak.
All right. Yeah, you're right. After all those interceptions Dak threw a couple of years ago, that was kind of the talk. Well, we got to help him. We got to run the ball. It's like, no, you're not going to do that. And then, Ed, on the other side, running back Jerome Ford for the Browns. They've got Pierre Strong Jr., Dante Foreman, who I think he's former Texans and maybe a former University of Texas player.
Yes.
Yeah, so that is their running back room. And I would say, you mentioned Jerry Jeudy coming over to go with Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore. Always interesting when you see a former player with Amari situation, and the Cowboys got so little for him after he was a very valuable player for the Cowboys. And as I recall, Ed, Amari Cooper was basically sent packing for the way he handled COVID, if I'm remembering that correctly, right?
Right. He was unavailable because he tested positive for COVID and didn't get vaccinated, and cost them games at Kansas City and at home against the Raiders. He missed both of those games around Thanksgiving time, both of which were bad losses for the Cowboys, and it seemed like that drove the franchise's decision to move on from Amari Cooper. They traded him to Cleveland for like a 5th-round pick or a 6th-round pick. So for almost nothing, they essentially gave him away, and now he's going to get an opportunity. I think the thing that made him unique, according to the coaches, was he had this incredible ability to change direction, explosive second step, and the Cowboys need a pass rush because while I think they're talented at corner, remember they're starting the season without Deron Bland, who's out for 6 to 8 weeks. Led the NFL in interceptions last year, set the NFL record for pick sixes. He's going to be replaced by Kalen Carson, a 5th-round pick and a rookie in his first NFL start. I would think the Browns are going to challenge him when they do throw the football. And on the other side, Trayvon Diggs is coming back from essentially an entire season lost to an ACL injury. And so the Cowboys are going to start the season, I think, a little uncertain of what exactly they have there early in the year.
All right, the Cowboys, a team that you can bank it, Ed. You find great cornerbacks in the 5th round, and then in the 4th round, you find great quarterbacks. All right, they just know how to do it, and that is the way we get this thing started. Now, Ed, I do not want to. I think WFAA may be waiting on you. I don't know if they're having like a big celebration to welcome you to the staff today. There may be cake involved. But before we shut down this special preview, Ed, give me, I think people would love to hear your prediction for this game. There may have been a time at ESPN where they didn't allow you to do this sort of thing, but Ed, there are no rules when it comes to podcasting. What do you have in this one? Can you give me a score?
Well, they have to play a first place schedule. They obviously have some positions of concern. What effect so many players, so many coaches facing uncertain futures and in the last year of their contracts has on everybody, I don't know. But I think it makes a strong start critically important. Do I think the Cowboys are going to have a 4th straight season of 12 wins? I don't. But I do think they'll get close, and I see them as an 11-win team this year.
All right, I've got the Cowboys with a 10-win team, and then Ed, if you'll give us a score on Sunday's game versus the Browns.
I'm going to go with the Browns 20-16.
Browns win 20-16. I have the Cowboys going on the road, even though they're not great at road team, and as the slight underdog. Although this thing will get bet up, and the Cowboys will probably be a pick 'em by the time the game happens. Cowboys win this thing 28-17 over the Browns. 28-17.
28-17. What did the Browns give up? I think on average at home last year, the Browns gave up like 9.8 points per game, and they went 8-1 at home.
Yep, going to go ahead and change that to 16-14. No, those are good. Those are just numbers, all right? That was last year's team. Cowboys, hey.
True. That's true.
Once they turn Dowdle loose at Municipal or wherever they play now, they'll really get this thing going. I don't think Modell's around anymore. Okay, it is the Doomsday Podcast. Ed, thank you. Congratulations on yet another gig, and we're sorry to see you go at ESPN, but as always, you land on your feet. You're doing your thing. You had a storied career there, and I thought we had a great run out in California with all our guests. The Doomsday Podcast will continue. Ed and I will be together at all home games, probably doing our taping from the beautiful Jim and Sally Nation suite high above AT&T Stadium. And then on the road games, Ed, we'll just figure out where you're going to be, because you'll basically have to stay up all night to be at that 6 a.m. You should not have agreed to that. Golly. What's our friend's name? Cynthia? I'm going to talk to her about that. I'm going to like, y'all made some major, y'all put Ed in a bad spot here. Okay, Ed, appreciate you, buddy. We'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
That is the Doomsday Podcast. For Ed Werder, I'm Matt Mosley. We will see you Sunday evening.
We are Rogue Media Sports.